ucy.tv. Why don't you stick around for more awesome radio?
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville, your host. Tonight is May 16th, 2016, and we're going to talk about a lot of different subjects tonight. Of course, we're going to talk about the Syrian situation, specifically the white helmets and the propaganda that's been coming out of this fake NGO, this humanitarian NGO, non-humanitarian NGO, I guess we should say. We're also going to talk about the nuclear disaster that is now raging across the United States, as well as some domestic politics. We'll touch on Hillary Clinton if we have the opportunity, and again the international situation and whatever else we are able to get into. But for those of you who are just joining us tonight for the first time, I'd like to remind you to catch Truth on the Tracks here every Monday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on ucy.tv, and you can access the show's personal webpage at ucy.tv/TT. And if you listen to the show and you want to engage in the chat, of course, that's ucy.tv/chat. If you're interested in my work, my articles come out regularly at activistpost.com, naturalblaze.com, eraofwisdom.org. And again, my work specifically, if you're interested in that, then BrandonTurbeville.com is the website where you want to be on a regular basis. That website is where I repost all of my articles, all the YouTube videos, all the archives of this show, and the books are located there as well. All the relevant information is located there as well. Now, just a couple of business announcements, I guess. I want to announce that the books are now available on Amazon.com, or almost all of the books are available on Amazon.com. Most of them are also available on Kindle. That was a process that went much slower than we had anticipated, dealing with publishing issues. But those books are now largely available in a more affordable format, and if you're in Europe or Japan and you want to get a hold of the books, you can now do so at a reasonable price. And of course, Kindle, if it's not up, it will be soon. 7 Real Conspiracies is now up on Amazon, Europe, US, and Japan. And of course, the Kindle version will be out also very soon. Now, we have another offer for those of you who support my work and want to support my work financially. For BrandonTurbeville.com readers and for the listeners to this show, if you want to support my work, a book by the name of M. Lorenz, that is the author of the book, and the title of the book is The Animals Say No Way. This is a children's book designed to educate children about the dangers of GMO food, and the author has graciously offered a copy of this book. So if you want to donate money to my website, to me, for $30, you'll get a thank you gift of the book, and that book will be sent to your doorstep. And it's received praise from F. William Engdahl, who wrote Seeds of Destruction, a very fine researcher in his own right. And this is a very valuable book if you have kids and you want to have something that kind of combat the propaganda of the scientific dictatorship that we're under. This is a valuable book. So basically, if you donate $30 or more, you will receive a copy of The Animals Say No Way by M. Lorenz. So the way you would do that, I'm going to have a post up on the website. So if it's not the top post, then scroll down and find it. It'll give you the donation instructions, which are basically to send me an email at anticodex@yahoo.com and let me know you're interested in donating money and receiving the book. That's the first step. And then I'll give you the PayPal information. I'll respond in an email, give you the PayPal information. You'll send me the PayPal donation, and I will confirm receipt of that donation. And then you can give me your shipping address in an email, and I'll send that out to the publisher of the book, and they will send you a copy of the book. That's how it's going to work. So just check BrandonTurbeville.com for that. And, of course, we thank M. Lawrence for that contribution. It's much appreciated. Now, in terms of the international situation, we want to talk about the White Helmets in Syria briefly, because this organization has been receiving a lot of attention in the mainstream media, or as much attention as mainstream media pays to non-celebrity, non-Donald Trump, non-Hillary Clinton news. But in terms of the reports that we're getting coming out of Syria, a lot of attention is being paid to the White Helmets, the NGO, the Human Rights NGO. It's an alleged Syrian organization that focuses on rescuing and providing medical care to injured civilians in Syria. With the hospital bombings in Aleppo that we talked about last week, there's been a growing amount of attention that's coming to the White Helmets now as a result of their reports. And according to the Western media, the White Helmets are knights in shining armor. They're willing to risk their life to save innocent people from the evil Assad. They're obviously angels, according to the Western media. But a more realistic look at the White Helmets is going to provide us with a much different view of that organization. So essentially, they're nothing more than a terrorist rescue operation that's funded and directed and promoted by Western governments and intelligence agencies and foundations that are aimed at assisting Western-backed terrorists in the destruction of Syria. This organization is a clever and opportunistic tool that is being used by the Western media for the purpose of sourcing false claims as if they're coming from an impartial activist group on the ground in Syria, and giving the source then the credibility of a human rights organization. The White Helmets need to be considered as nothing more than a branch of the Western destabilization apparatus, right? That they're a wing of Jabhat al-Nusra, and they're entirely discredited. And if you examine the nature and the reality of the organization, whatever claims that White Helmets want to make should be immediately dismissed as just another false statement and a long string of lies that are easily traced back to the United States and the UK. So let's do that briefly. Let's take a look at the history and formation of the White Helmets, the founders and directors. The White Helmets was founded by James Le Mesurier. Le Mesurier is an admitted former British Army officer and former mercenary with the Olive Group. The Olive Group is a private contracting organization that is now merged with Blackwater Academy into this organization called Constellus Holdings. And although the White Helmets kind of half-heartedly attempt to hide its source of funding, the organization is not only linked to George Soros through a PR firm named Purpose Incorporated. That's a pro-war firm that argues for Western intervention against Assad. The co-founder of Purpose is Jeremy Hamans, who also helped found Avaz, and that's another pro-democracy, and I put that in quotes, pro-democracy group that's connected to George Soros' Open Society Foundation, SEU, or SEAO, however you want to say it, and MoveOn.org, all Soros operations. And I've done an expose on them before. You can go check that out online on BrandonTurbeville.com, activistpost.com. So, White Helmets were established in March 2013, not in Syria, but in Istanbul, in Turkey. And again, it's headed by James Le Mesurier, the ex-security specialist and British military intelligence officer. He's got an impressive track record in some of the most dubious NATO intervention theaters. He was involved in Bosnia and Kosovo, Iraq, and Lebanon, and Palestine. Le Mesurier is a product of Britain's elite Royal Military Academy at Sandhurst, and has also been placed in a series of high-profile posts in the United Nations, the European Union, and the UK Foreign and Commonwealth Office. So he's been around, to say the least. The origin of the White Helmet's initial $300,000 seed funding, the startup money, is a little bit hazy. Reports are contradictory on that, but subsequent information does lead us to conclude that the UK, the US, and the so-called Syrian opposition, the Syrian National Council, are connected. And logistical support for the White Helmets has been provided by Turkish elite natural disaster response teams known as AKUT, right? AKUT. Now, the White Helmets were given $13 million during 2013, and this is where it really gets a little more obvious and interesting. The early reports suggest that these donations came from the U.S., the UK, and the Syrian National Council, with the additional connections to George Soros in the U.S. But subsequent investigations revealed that USAID, the United States Agency for International Development, has been a major shareholder in the White Helmet organization. You go to the USAID website, and it says, "Our work supports long-term and equitable economic growth and advances U.S. foreign policy objectives by supporting economic growth, agriculture and trade, global health and democracy, conflict prevention, and humanitarian assistance," end quote. Well, that's, of course, a wing of the State Department and one of the major organizations involved in color revolutions across the world and destabilizations across the world. And USAID, in a report issued by USAID in July 2015, it was stated clearly that they supplied over $16 million in assistance to the White Helmets. That's coming directly from USAID. In addition to that $16 million and George Soros funding, the White Helmets are known to receive approximately $23 million from the U.S. State Department via USAID. That was actually confirmed more recently by Deputy State Department spokesman Mark Toner when he was questioned by reporters at a State Department briefing on April 27th of this year. So it's no surprise that the White Helmets have been publicly calling for Western intervention in Syria, particularly because a no-fly zone is the ultimate goal. Well, not the ultimate goal, but the goal of the State Department, right? The organization is a fully funded arm of the U.S. and Western imperialism, so no wonder that it calls for the same desires and goals set by the U.S. Western imperialists. It's reasonable to expect the group to publicly call for the same wishes as their bosses in the U.S. and Europe. Now, that's just one connection with the White Helmets here. This is the organization that gets painted as the knights in shining armor for the Syrian people in the Western media. Raed Saleh, he is the head of the White Helmets, also known as Syrian Civil Defense. The White Helmets go by two different names. He's publicly called for the implementation of a no-fly zone over Syria by the United Nations Security Council. That's an act that is essentially direct military warfare. And you can see the results of that in Libya, and we've seen a number of American generals come out and say that indeed that would be essentially an all-out war if we announced that we wanted a no-fly zone in Syria. So it's going to be a repeat of the Libyan tragedy. Now, on the website, the White Helmets website, Saleh says this: "Barrel bombs, sometimes filled with chlorine, are the biggest killer of civilians in Syria today. Our unarmed and neutral rescue workers have saved more than 40,823 people from the attacks in Syria, but there are many we cannot reach. There are children trapped in rubble we cannot hear. For them, the UN Security Council must follow through on its demand made last year to stop the barrel bombs by introducing a no-fly zone if necessary," end quote. Now, if you notice the nice little propaganda heartstrings that there are children trapped in rubble we cannot hear. We can't hear them because Assad is flying over, dropping barrel bombs, apparently. And a no-fly zone, direct military intervention, war against Syria will make us be able to hear the little children trapped in rubble. Nice attempt to tear at the heartstrings by Saleh. But he's an interesting guy himself, right? Because he's the Western media and public relations firms and stuff are always ready to shower Saleh and the White Helmets with millions of dollars and flattering PR material. The U.S. apparently doesn't trust Saleh enough to allow him free access to American soil, because in April of this year, he was set to receive a backslapping award in Washington, D.C., and his visa was canceled. He was forced to go back to his base in Turkey, in Istanbul. So we had reports from the New York Times saying that Raed Saleh, the head of the Syria Civil Defense, was to accept an award from Interaction. That's an alliance of aid agencies. It had a gala dinner Tuesday night in Washington, D.C. As I said, it's a typical backslapping award to award the destabilization experts, give them an extra little bit of money, nice dinner, and feed their egos a little bit. The keynote speaker was Gail Smith, of course. That's notable because that is the administrator of the U.S. Agency for International Development. But when Saleh arrived at Washington's Dulles International Airport coming from Istanbul, the authorities there said he couldn't enter the United States and told him that his visa had been canceled. Now, it's not clear officially why his name may have shown up on a database, but it apparently did, and he wasn't allowed back into the United States. The State Department did not give specifics. John Kirby wouldn't say anything about it. State Department spokesman Mark Toner, who's now becoming famous for his inability to explain propaganda to the general public. I mean, you've got reporters in this room who are usually ready and willing to eat up any kind of garbage that you feed them, and then translate it into as something that comes out the other end for the rest of the population. And these guys can't even get a tangible word out of the guy because he constantly stumbles upon his own words, and he can't get the propaganda line right. Of course, in his defense, I don't think we can blame Mark Toner too much for that. He's being asked to explain contrary and contradictory policies and to deny reality, so there's only so much you can do without having a few gaffes. So in that questioning with Mark Toner, the reporter essentially got him to admit that they give the White Helmets $23 million in assistance. You want a direct quote? Mark Toner says, well, I can tell you that we provide through U.S. aid about $23 million in assistance to them, end quote. So go look that up. Now, we've also got Mossab Obeidat, who's the White Helmets project officer. Mossab Obeidat was the previous assistant chief of mission with the Qatar Red Crescent, and the chief official, one of the chief officials for the Qatar Red Crescent, was Khaled Diab, which was a gentleman who was accused of supplying $2.2 million to secure arms for the terrorist groups in Syria. There was an article in Al-Akhbar from June 2013, which will tell that story. And then there's also 3 other members of the White Helmets team that were part of the so-called Syrian Revolution. We have Farouk al-Habib, which is one of the 3 most prominent White Helmets leaders. He was also a leader of the Homs uprising against the Syrian government, according to his own testimony, where he says he was tortured by the Syrian regime security forces for smuggling a journalist into Syria to cover the peaceful protest. Well, right there, we already know that what he has to say is bullshit, because if he says that there were peaceful protests, that's especially as far into the war as 2012, we know that that's absolutely false. There were no peaceful protests. It was violent from the word go. Now, Habib was a founding member of the Homs Revolutionary Council, right? This is a terrorist council a terrorist administrative council, terrorist group that administrates the terrorist-held territory, where they implement Sharia law and all kinds of other savagery. The Homs Revolutionary Council was linked to the CIA, right? And in fact, the CIA had been linked to about all the revolutionary councils in Syria, period, but that one specifically was linked directly to the CIA. And Habib fled to Turkey in 2013, of course, because that's a safe haven for terrorists. Now, let's look at what they've done. Let's look at some propaganda, right? The fraudulent photos. And in addition to calling for the implementation of a no-fly zone, the White Helmets have also gone so far as to post fraudulent photos to blame the Syrian military for civilian casualties and blame or claim that the Syrian military was intentionally targeting civilians. And that's not the case, but that's what the claims were nevertheless. In October of 2015, the White Helmets released pictures on its Twitter account purporting to show the aftermath of a Russian bombing campaign against ISIS and their other terrorist organizations that was launched on September 30th. The caption said, "Russia strike in Homs today, 33 civilians killed, including 3 children and 1 White Helmets volunteer, Syria civil defense volunteer." The picture showed a bleeding girl being held by a civil defense volunteer, claimed that the girl was injured along with a number of other civilians by the Russian bombing. But unfortunately for the White Helmets, the Twitter users, actually many of them more adept at paying attention to what's going on than certainly the general public, they immediately exposed those photos as a fraud because the pictures were not taken on September 30th after the Russian bombing. It was taken 5 days earlier on September 25th, and it was not a result of Russian bombing at all, right? It was something else entirely. Now, interestingly enough, the White Helmets, they've attempted to assist in drumming up opposition to Vladimir Putin and Russia's attack on the jihadists. They tweeted about the horror of Russia's airstrikes in Syria, but they did it hours before Russia's parliament even granted Putin the authority to use the Air Force in Syria. So again, unless these guys have a crystal ball, this is obviously propaganda. Now, despite routinely being cited as a humanitarian organization, the White Helmets appear to be much more than even a wolf in sheep's clothing, even in the NGO world, because not only do they provide the basis for carefully crafted propaganda opportunities, the organization appears to actually work side by side with terrorist organizations like Jabhat al-Nusra on the propaganda angle and on the battlefield itself. For one, it's important to remember that the area of operation that the White Helmets operate in is never within territory controlled by the Syrian government. It is without deviation solely located within territory held by moderate terrorists, Nusra, Western-backed terrorist groups, etc. Never in Syrian government territories. If the White Helmets really represented the Syrian people, wouldn't they be operating in both territories? Why only in the terrorist organization-held areas? So we have Rick Sterling in his article, Highly Effective Manipulators. He says, the trainees are said to be nonpartisan but only work in rebel-controlled areas of Idlib, now controlled by Nusra, Al-Qaeda, and Aleppo. There are widely divergent claims regarding the number of people trained by the White Helmets and the number of people rescued. The numbers are probably highly exaggerated, especially since rebel-controlled territories have few civilians. A doctor who recently served in a rebel-controlled area of Aleppo described it as a ghost town. The White Helmets work primarily with the rebel group Jabhat al-Nusra, Al-Qaeda in Syria. End quote. So what Sterling's trying to get across here is that because these organizations, because White Helmets only works within terrorist-controlled areas of Syria, the amount of civilians that are able to be rescued is going to be automatically lower. And the reason for that is because whenever the bearded monkeys that are funded by the West take over a swath of land or a city or a town, the civilized people there flee. They leave because they don't want the moderate rebels in control, right? They fear them, they hate them, they loathe them, and they run. And they don't run necessarily to Turkey or Jordan. They run to government-held areas in Syria. They run to the government-held areas, which this is why we call them internally displaced people. Not displaced, but internally displaced. So they're leaving their homes, but they're going to places like Latakia and government-held areas of Aleppo. So these guys are working in areas that are controlled by the death squad organizations, and most of these areas are like ghost towns because the civilians have fled. They've fled the democracy that the United States wants to impose upon them. So because of this, one has to wonder, who are all these people they're rescuing? Right? Who are they rescuing? They're in terrorist-held areas, very few civilians, but they're rescuing people left and right. All right, so the claims of the White Helmets is that they are unarmed and unbiased. That's their big tagline, right? We're unarmed and unbiased. Nothing could be further from the truth. We look at the pictures and the video footage of the White Helmets, and you see that they're incredibly biased and that they're visibly armed. It's a myth-building process, right? They're described repetitively as ordinary people. In fact, I think their website says they're bakers, tailors, engineers, pharmacists, painters, carpenters, students, etc. They're always painted as heroes, miracle workers, saints, superhumans, all of this kind of stuff. Unarmed and unbiased, right? They sacrificed themselves for the Syrian people. But the Syrian people, generally speaking, have never heard of them. This is a Western creation. So can an organization be independent? Can it be an independent relief organization when it's being funded by a foreign government who's directly involved in the military overthrow of Syria's government? So how can it be independent? How can it be unbiased? Most intelligent people don't have any problem answering that question. But if you look at the videos that come out of Syria, we have one, for instance, that shows a white helmet operative describing the throwing of shabiha bodies into the trash. Now, shabiha is a term that's used for Syrian government militia, but it's a derogatory term. It's calling someone shabiha is basically saying that they're a government thug, sort of a brown shirt, I guess would be a sort of an acronym here or a synonym here that we'd use, that we could compare it to. So they're bragging about throwing shabiha bodies into the trash, and right there, using that term shows you some bias. But the bragging of throwing the the bodies into the trash, that should tell you something else. That's something that is not a common term unless you're a terrorist, unless you're a so-called Syria opposition fighter, unless you're an NGO, maybe a biased NGO. That's the term that's thrown around. We also have to remember that we have white helmet claims on their websites of how aid workers have risked sniper fire to rescue SAA bodies and give them a proper burial. Well, that's interesting, because this white helmet operative is describing not what would be a proper burial, but throwing their bodies into the trash. So that's contradictory there. Now we have another video. The same guy. He goes on he actually pledges allegiance to the terrorist forces in the area. He says, "They are our role models, the best of people, and we have the honor to serve them." Serve them. Al-Nusra and Al-Qaeda is who he's referring to, by the way. So that's the neutral, impartial, humanitarian, secular organization, right? Same guy in another video congratulates the Mujahideen for liberating Jisr al-Shughur from Assad's forces. This is what he says: "Glad tidings have reached us in Jisr al-Shughur by the hands of our Mujahideen brothers. May Allah strengthen them and make them steadfast on the correct way, and soon, inshallah, the strongholds of the Assad regime in Latakia and Damascus will be liberated." Well, again, unarmed, unbiased, huh? So we should look at these alleged moderates that are in these videos and actually, are they moderate at all? Right? They're extremists. They're jihadists. They're working with Al Qaeda and Al Nusra. The Western media, of course, has hidden that fact. We've also got another video where the white helmet operatives are standing on the dead bodies of the Syrian army soldiers, giving the victory sign. All right, they're displaying support for al-Nusra and other terrorists who just massacred these soldiers. Of course, not giving them a proper burial either. So we've got a number of photos, large amounts of video footage available showing the allegedly unarmed white helmets parading around with rifles, virtually indistinguishable in their appearance and actions from the terrorists they're working with, except for the actual white helmets. At least in one instance, we have white helmets members videotaped apparently taking part in the execution of a man condemned to death by Nusra in ISIS. And in that video, the execution of the man who's shot in the head by the terrorist is clearly shown, but before his body is even really fully still, the white helmets arrive at the scene within seconds to collect the body as if they were simply on standby. And you can watch that video there. Only seconds later, they're there cleaning up the body as if they were just standing shortly behind the camera, waiting on the guy to get shot in the head so they could go pick up the body. So, with all of that information taken together, we should consider white helmets to be nothing more than a terrorist rescue operation and a propaganda wing for the al-Nusra Front. This organization is wholly funded and directed and promoted by Western governments and intelligence agencies, foundations, for the purposes of assisting Western-backed terrorists in destroying Syria and replacing it with this collection of impotent, religious, ethnic-based, petty, squabbling microstates and mini-states. The organization serves as a clever and opportunistic tool to be used by Western media for the purpose of, again, as I mentioned earlier, sourcing false claims from supposedly impartial activist groups on the ground, and then giving those claims the source and credibility of a human rights organization, giving it a veneer of respectability. So whatever claims are made by this group should be just entirely dismissed. It's false. Don't listen to them. Don't pay them any attention. And if you hear of anyone parroting this white helmets line in terms of what is going on in Syria, then please share this article with them. And it's up at BrandonTurbeville.com, an activist post as well. It's entitled "White Helmets NGO, a Rescue and Assist Operation Under Guise of Human Rights." Please share that with them. Now, enough with the white helmets. Let's talk about something else. I just want to mention briefly, we've got John Rosenthal, who is a mainstream Western reporter. Right? He's written for the National Review, Wall Street Journal Europe, World Affairs, a number of other organizations. He's been a known critic of Western intervention in Libya and Syria since the beginning of both of those invasions. And what he has found, and he's just recently spoken out about this, and it's something that we knew for the entire situation, right? We knew this from the very beginning, that mainstream outlets are much less likely to accept material criticizing imperialist measures, and they're virtually united in refusing to print material that doesn't paint the targets of Western imperialism in an unfairly bad light. Now, while hesitancy to publish material that's critical of the governments for whom these outlets often speak, that's surely been a hallmark of the mainstream corporate press for a long time. But the noose of censorship and the tightening of the grip on information has become even stronger in recent years, at least in this regard. It's something that Rosenthal himself has been candid about in regard to his own career, which he claims has been a victim of that censorship, and he sees that growing with each crisis. The BRICS Post recently did an interview with Rosenthal and discussed a number of different topics, one of them being the state of the media and the Western media coverage of the crisis in Syria and Libya. And what he revealed was that mainstream outlets, or at least from a mainstream journalist point of view, the journalistic culture in 2016 and the policy of mainstream outlets is more wedded to the idea of pushing agendas and suppressing facts when it comes to geopolitics and international crises and Anglo-American war aims, and even during the period leading up to the Iraq War in 2003. And he was asked a number of questions. We won't spend all the time going through his interview. You can read that interview. Mainstream journalist slams MSM coverage of Syrian crisis, incomparably worse than coverage of Iraq war. And you can see what Rosenthal has to say. That's up at BrandonTurbeville.com. It's up at ActivistPost.com. It would take too long to simply read the interview here, but he has a lot of good information and lots of powerful statements to make, and it would do well to share this around as well. But simply because Rosenthal has been a victim of the censorship surrounding Syria and Libya, and it would do well to have this one mainstream journalist who is speaking out about it get as much press as possible. Now let's move on. The international situation continues to become more and more open and brazen in terms of what the United States is doing overseas, but also domestically we see how this false dichotomy of Democrat, Republican, left-wing, right-wing, all of that kind of stuff is used to divide and distract. Now, Obama has been considered one of the most anti-Israel administrations in recent history, right? Well, since the creation of the settler state in the 40s. And the Republicans routinely paint Barack Obama as a ultra-left, anti-Israel president. The Bibi Netanyahu is constantly whining and bitching about how Obama is not worshiping him or his settler state properly. And, of course, the right-wing version of the American media puppet show is always decrying him in the same way. But if the reports that are coming out of both the Israeli media and now the mainstream U.S. media are true, and they probably are, the most anti-Israel administration in recent years is about to sign a deal with Israel for what is about to be the largest package of finance and military assistance to any nation, not just Israel, in U.S. history. Just to kind of highlight the false dichotomy, right? We had 83 U.S. senators that sent a letter to the White House urging Obama to sign a military aid deal with Israel. And this was all part of the strategy. It's all part of the theater to pretend that Obama and the Democrats are anti-Israel and the Republicans and the Republicans are all pro-Israel, right, in line with the Bible. So these guys sent a letter to Obama urging him to sign a military aid deal with Israel. Of course, the right-wing media says these 83 senators are doing whatever they can to protect the Israelis, and the left-wing media says, look at these senators trying to bully poor victim Obama. Well, what was already happening behind the scenes is that the United States, and this is according to a White House official also, was preparing to sign a memorandum of understanding with Israel that would constitute the largest single military pledge in U.S. history. In U.S. history, not just for Israel, in U.S. history. Israel is demanding $40 billion over the next 10 years. Previously, they've been given $30 billion over 10 years, but now they're asking for 40. But now this tentative agreement it's just another example of this false left-right paradigm, and it sees the left as being weak on terror, weak on Iran, and anti-Israel, while the false left is actually launching wars across the world and bullying Iran into accepting a deal it should have never had to accept to begin with, and then giving Israel the largest amount of assistance in U.S. history. So we have no doubt that the Israeli aid package will go through. Now, let's take a look at Saudi Arabia while we're talking about settler states and savage kingdoms. Let's look at Saudi Arabia. Saudi war crimes and crimes against humanity are continuing apace in Yemen day by day. But they're now attempting to gain public support and better reception from the viewing audience by painting itself as the enemy of Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And that's a stretch nonetheless. And this is all being done despite the fact that the feudal monarchy's reputation for supporting these very same terror organizations has been documented time and time again. So in Syria, in Libya, in Yemen, all these places, Saudi Arabia has proven itself repeatedly as a funder and an organizer and supporter of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And at home, it's demonstrated that its own government and ISIS are more alike than they're different. But they still attempt to show that the Saudi Arabian government is the enemy of Al-Qaeda because they issue claims that the Saudi coalition in Yemen has fought a large-scale battle against the terrorists in Yemen and is able to capture the city of Mukalla after killing around 800 terrorists. And I bring this up. This is just one little blip in the Yemeni crisis, but I want to bring this up because it's important. The AFP has a report that Yemeni troops backed, but let me read the report. It says, quote, Yemeni troops backed by Arab coalition airstrikes killed more than 800 members of Al-Qaeda in an attack on southeastern provincial capital held by the group for the past year, the coalition said Monday. The pro-government forces recaptured an oil terminal as well as the city of Mukalla, which was considered a jihadist stronghold, military sources said. The operation resulted in the death of more than 800 Al-Qaeda members and some of their leaders, while some others fled, Arab coalition commanders said in a statement published by SPA, the official Saudi news agency. Okay. First, we need to note that the death toll, according to the AFP itself, cannot be independently verified and pointed out that no civilian deaths were reported. This is the most questionable detail, to say the least, right? The death toll cannot be independently verified, but we know that no civilian deaths were reported. That doesn't make any sense at all. Now, what is interesting is that the alleged operation is part of another alleged operation which is aimed at securing parts of the country captured by terrorist forces that, again, allegedly exploited a year-long war between the Gulf-backed loyalists and the Houthi rebels, which are fighting there in Yemen. So the operation itself takes place alongside a UN-brokered ceasefire that was enacted on April 11th, where the jihadist groups were excluded. But what's even more interesting is the description provided by military officer sources quoted by the AFP as to the nature of the battle for Mukalla. He says, "We entered the city center of Mukalla and were met by no resistance from Al-Qaeda militants who withdrew west towards the vast desert in Hadramaut and Shabwa provinces." Okay, so we entered the city center of Mukalla and were met by no resistance from Al-Qaeda members who withdrew west. While it was reported that the coalition members had conducted airstrikes against Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula positions in Yemen, we got to note that there was no resistance when they entered Mukalla. Putting aside the fact that the Yemeni people would scarcely be able to tell the difference between AQAP and Saudi Arabia controlling their country to begin with, at what point did the Saudis kill 800 AQAP members? Was it in the alleged and unconfirmed airstrikes, which apparently kill only terrorists but no civilians? Is it not extremely convenient that Saudi forces would bomb Yemen back into the Stone Age, allow AQAP to gain vast amounts of territory against Houthi rebels and other rebels in the process, and then retake it from them without any resistance shortly after a ceasefire agreement is made that doesn't include them. So here's another question. Was the Saudi bombing merely an act of death squad herding, or was the Saudi bombing never aimed at AQAP at all? Were the casualties actually civilians simply labeled as terrorists for propaganda purposes? Was there actually a bombing campaign at all? What kind of military operation kills 800 militants and at the same time faces no resistance from those militants? All of these questions are relevant. All of them have to be asked of any report suggesting Saudi military action against AQAP in Yemen. Well, it's impossible to draw a concrete conclusion at this point because we don't have enough evidence to do so. Currently, the reports currently circulating throughout the Western media, considering the nature of the Saudi involvement in the history of supporting terrorism across the world, we have to question all of these reports, and we have to question all of these claims as well as the motives made by the Saudi government. Now, just Al-Mukalla is a strategic city in the Abyan Governorate. It's very important to territorial gains. It provides access to the coast, so that might provide us with a little bit more of a longer view as to what may have happened here. Now, since we're talking about the Saudis and the Israelis, the series of secret meetings, right? We should probably talk about the Saudis first. There were a series of secret meetings between Saudi Arabia and Israel, these officials, that were actually exposed by a very select few of mainstream press outlets. Both the Saudis and Israelis are now becoming more open about the relationship between the two governments after that was exposed. Now, for years, GCC countries like Saudi Arabia have held a position of hostility toward Israel, a public position of hostility toward Israel. But many of us, researchers and observers, have long been aware and long argued that there's been a secret cooperation between the two, and that public statements were largely designed to provide a cover of Arab identity and self-interest for the benefit of public consumption. But, the two do share common goals. This is obvious enough. When it comes to Iran, when it comes to Hezbollah, when it comes to Syria, all of them have the common ally of the United States. So we have also, in 2009, a U.S. State Department diplomatic cable gave us a glimpse into this Israeli GCC alliance, right? The cable has a quote from the Israeli foreign minister official Yaakov Hadass saying that the Gulf Arabs believe in Israel's role because of their perception of Israel's close relationship with the United States. He also said that the GCC believes Israel can work magic. The Israeli state and the Israeli settler state and the Gulf states have that common interest, again, in countering any rising Iranian influence in the Middle East. So when there was the public sparring where Israel's CAS-led military operation killed about 1,400 people in the Gaza Strip, Saudi Arabia condemned that operation in a letter to the United Nations and called it fierce aggression. That was all for public consumption. Of course, Saudi Arabia had to do that because of the nature of its population and its reputation in the region. They had to criticize Israel publicly because you can't support Israel publicly in the Middle East. So they decried this operation, but at the same time that they were publicly decrying the operation, they had good personal relationships with the Israelis behind closed doors, and that's coming from Hadass himself in one of those cables. Hadass even reportedly said that the Gulf Arabs were still not ready to do publicly what they say in private. So this gives us another window into the connections between the Saudis and the Israelis. And you go 6 years forward from 2009, and we see that we're starting to see that the GCC states are finally preparing to go public about their relationship with Israel, and slowly public. We had an event at the Council on Foreign Relations a few weeks ago in Washington, D.C., and it was actually reported on by Eli Lake of Bloomberg, where a high-ranking former Saudi and high-ranking former Saudi officials and former high-ranking Israeli officials not only shared the stage, but disclosed that both countries have been holding a series of high-level meetings to discuss shared strategic goals, particularly around the perceived regional ascendance of Iran. And at that event, the former Saudi General Anwar Eshki openly called for regime change in Iran. Right, and the former Israeli ambassador to the UN, Dor Gold, he was a fierce public critic of Saudi Arabia in the past. He spoke of outreach to the country in recent years, right, and the possibility of resolving the remaining differences between Saudi Arabia and Israel. He says, "Our standing today on this stage does not mean we have resolved all the differences that our countries have shared over the years, but our hope is we will be able to address them fully in the years ahead," end quote. So we see this public warming of relations. We've also got signals that there are growing intelligence connections between the Israelis and the Gulf states. And again, I would preface this by saying, when I say growing connections, I would say growing public knowledge of those connections. We have, in the past few years, we've had this dual phenomenon of Arab uprisings and growing Iranian influences that has really tightened that connection between the GCC and Israel. Last year, we had Saudi Prince Turki bin Faisal, who went so far as to publish an op-ed in a major Israeli newspaper calling for peace between Israel and the GCC, as well as for a resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We've also seen where the ascendancy of Iran has strengthened covert security cooperation between Israel and the GCC as well. We've got investigative news site Middle East Eye actually documented the existence of regular secret flights between Abu Dhabi and Tel Aviv, despite the public ban on Israeli citizens from entering the United Arab Emirates. So those alliances, by the way, were largely cemented when the Saudi Arabia banned Al-Manar, right? This happened recently. Saudi Arabia banned Al-Manar from operating inside Saudi Arabia, and that, of course, is a television channel owned by Hezbollah. And shortly thereafter, Saudi Arabia labeled Hezbollah as a terrorist organization publicly. And, of course, Hezbollah is an enemy of Israel and a close friend of Iran. So you can see those geopolitical alliances strengthening there. Now, shortly after the secret meetings between the Israelis and the Saudis, there were reports that we were going to see a reparation of relations between Israel and Turkey as well. So apparently the Syrian war has accomplished many things, and apparently the conflict there has the ability to mend publicly broken relationships between Israel and other nations in a way that no other international incident has been able to do in the past. So either conflict in the Middle East has magical properties, or these new friends with Israel have found so much more in common that the two countries can't hide their friendship any longer, even from the general public and international onlookers at the state level. In an effort to mend ties, we have the Undersecretary of Turkish Foreign Ministers, Feridun Sinirlioglu, holding a secret meeting with the Israeli spy chief in Sweden in early April of this year. The public relationship between Turkey and Israel has deteriorated, again, publicly, after Israeli soldiers raided the Turkish flotilla, the Mavi Marmara, which was headed to Gaza to lift the blockade in 2010. Both countries did begin gradually restoring diplomatic and economic ties. In January 2009, though, Erdogan lashed out and criticized Israel's conduct in Gaza at the World Economic Forum in Davos, but this was merely just a public show, again, for the same reason that the Saudi Arabians were doing so which is to placate the population, which is decidedly anti-Israel. You can't really publicly support Israel in any of these positions, so they go out and lash out at them. But in the back rooms, they're quite friends. Just like Saudi Arabia, Turkey and Israel have similar interests also. The goal of destroying Syria. They both have antipathy toward Iran and Hezbollah, and they both have the United States as a mutual ally. So that is something there. Now, just to shift gears briefly, and we're still going to be talking about the international situation because I just want to throw this out there for anybody who may be interested. We had a simple decree by the Argentinian government regarding food inspection has now ignited a major fight in the country regarding who is inspecting food and the power that Monsanto has over its government. Argentina is, of course, the world's third largest soy exporter. May have just really poked their finger in Monsanto's eye here just by putting forth just a bit of an idea of the suggestion of having national sovereignty. The issue is surrounding the fact that Monsanto has been demanding that exporters inspect cargo to determine whether or not farmers have been paid the required royalties to produce genetically modified soybeans. Monsanto is claiming that the Argentine farmers have benefited from the Intacta technology and is demanding that everybody pay for it. So for about a year, Monsanto has been pressuring shipping companies and demanding that the companies notify it when the crops produced with Intacta technology are scheduled to be exported without the corresponding documentation that proves that royalties have been paid to Monsanto. Now, the Intacta soybeans are genetically engineered to have this gene that protects them against worms that target the plant, and Monsanto is demanding royalties for grains produced even by second-generation seeds. Farmers are saying that Argentinian law doesn't require that they pay for second-generation production. They're asking the government to stop Monsanto and private companies from acting as food inspectors. They're saying that's the job of the Argentinian government. We had the Argentine Rural Society, the SRA, this organization that represents medium and large-scale producers, said that the inspections were not warranted. SRA President Luis Echeverri says these methods were not only not authorized, but furthermore, we saw them as an abusive power for a company to be acting like the police. All right, so we have an official bulletin that came out on April 14th. That's Argentina's agricultural ministry stated that any inspection needs prior government authorization. Now, it didn't mention Monsanto or the dispute between the farmers and the company, but it appears that the Argentinian government did assert itself just in the small, most minute way that they are responsible for inspection and not Monsanto, that it can't just unilaterally force people to come in and start bullying them and inspect the grains and the seeds. But shortly after that statement was released, the government of President Mauricio Macri passed a resolution officially giving control of the analysis of seeds to the Argentinian government. So now it's official. It's passed. And Monsanto is now trying to challenge the government's decision. So it's sort of a compromise, though. The Argentinian government has agreed to collect money owed by small farmers in royalties on genetically modified soybeans. The government requested more time to do so, but even that was unacceptable to Monsanto, and the corporation rejected the government's request, according to two unnamed Monsanto staff members, according to Bloomberg. We have Ricardo Boreale, the agricultural minister, and a number of members of his staff have met with representatives of Monsanto and the chief operating officer, Brett Begman, to request a waiver on the owed royalties. Monsanto rejected that waiver request, did agree to slash the royalties that are being demanded from $15 per hectare to $9 per hectare for growers who use the technology, but who didn't actually purchase the seeds directly from Monsanto. they did agree, both the government and Monsanto, that large soybean producers needed to pay royalties. But what's interesting is that Monsanto's stock rose 3% on the heels of that announcement. That over the last year, that stock has declined significantly by about 7% over the last year. So the issue is surrounding the fact that Monsanto, again, has been demanding that exporters inspect cargo to